Tonight, I'm showing you some of my favorite simple jigs that I use all the time in my shop. I almost have my shop to where I want it, but as I've been unpacking things and pulling things out of boxes, I've found some of the jigs that I use throughout my shop. And it reminded me of all these simple things that I use that are super helpful, and I think will help you too. Most of these jigs are made up of between 1 and 3 pieces of wood. So let's jump right in. The first one that you probably have heard of before is the simple bench hook. This thing is amazing. It's simple, it's easy to make. All you do is nail 3 boards together so that you have a lip on the top and a lip on the bottom. That gives it the hook element so you can hook it on the edge of your bench. This gives you a solid surface you can push against for cutting, chiseling, any type of woodworking activity where you need to hold it firm on the bench and you have one hand free. Next up is a simple thing made out of one board called a chisel block or a drill block. This is the one that I use for chisels. And as you can see, it has kind of an L shape to it. This is something I can put onto the surface of my board and I can hold a chisel onto it like this. The chisel will stay at a 90-degree angle. The same concept can be used for a drill bit if you're trying to keep your drill perpendicular. You can use a tall one like this if you're not drilling in very deep, or I have a smaller one. So that way, I make sure I'm drilling 90 degrees, I'm not drilling at an angle at all. This will help you to see when you're truly perpendicular to the board that you're drilling into. Next up is the zero clearance insert. Now what this does is make sure that you have a nice clean cut on all of the things that you cut with your circular saw. It has a nice square edge so that any chips will break off right on that corner when the blade's going by it. That way you don't have the tear out that you would without that. You can put this on a table saw, a miter saw, a circular saw, band saw. You can put it on anything where you're trying to reduce chip out. Now, there's 2 different ways to do this. One is the quick and dirty way that I've done on my miter saw many times. I will usually take 2 boards and I will tape them top and bottom on my miter saw. Then when I put my board in place to cut with it, I'll cut through those boards as well, in addition to the piece that I'm trying to cut. That creates a disposable zero clearance insert. This is great if you just need something fast. Now, if you have time, you can go the nicer route where you create a custom throat plate for whatever tool you're using. I've done that on my circular saw and I've used it like that for years, and it's turned it into almost a track saw. Track saws still have a little bit of an edge on it though. For this video, I'm going to show you how I made a zero clearance insert for my miter saw. The hardest part about this is making sure you have the right thickness of material, because you want it to sit down inside the slot, not be raised up above the edge at all, but it has to be exactly that thickness. So in order to achieve this, I dug through my plywood scraps and I found 2 scraps that if I put them together came out to the right thickness. Then I pulled out a whole bunch of clamps and slathered these 2 boards with glue. Once that was dry, I measured it again and I had just the right thickness. So with that now, I could measure the exact width of the opening. I ripped it down on the table saw and then I had to trace on the curvature at either end of the insert. I drew it on as best I could, then cut it out with the bandsaw and sanded it down to get it exactly to fit. I had to do a lot of tweaking and sanding and measuring to get it to fit exactly in there, but eventually I did and it slipped right into the opening. I also had to trace the holes in on all the sides and counterbore them down so that the heads of the screws would sit below the surface of the board. Once I put it all together, I screwed in all the fasteners and then I made the first cut. And this is the most satisfying part about making a zero clearance insert, is when you make that first cut and it cuts cleanly through your insert. You can choose if you want to do the quick and dirty route or the nicer route. Either way, you're going to get the same result. One will just last probably a little bit longer. The next one is a bit of a stretch because it's not really a jig, it's a clamp, and it's a particular type of clamp. This particular type of wooden hand screw clamp is really useful. These you can get really cheap and you can get good quality ones. You can buy some of these from Rockler for usually less than 20 bucks. The great thing about these is that you can make these 2 jaws parallel to each other and you can have even pressure all the way along. It's also a nice square wooden clamp, so you don't have to worry about hitting this with a chisel or with a hand plane or something. You may have noticed that at this point in my shop, I still don't have a vise. I haven't had a vise in my shop for years. And some people have asked me how I can do so much woodworking without a vise. And these hand screw clamps are the key. I can put this clamp on a board and hold it upright, and I use another one to clamp it down to the table, and now I can hand plane. Now I have a nice stop I can push against. I've used them to hold down all kinds of things. You can do many things with these clamps. You're only limited by how creative you can be on it. Next up are spacer blocks. And I've got these for all different kinds of things. This particular set here is my French cleat spacers. And I put these between my boards as I'm installing French cleats. They're just plywood that I cut out that are 3 inches wide. If you use spacer blocks like this though, make sure you write on them so that you know what they are and you don't throw them away. Another spacer block I use is this guy. And this is exactly 12 inches long. What this does for me is it extends my miter station stop blocks. My stop blocks have to stop in the table. They can't go onto the actual tool, but that makes it so that I can't cut anything smaller than about 12 inches. So if I'm cutting something that's 6 inches wide, I can go to the little red numbers on here, 6 inches, and set it on that. I put my 12-inch spacer in, and now I'm a foot closer to the blade, and I have an exactly 6-inch cut from my stop block. Then I can repeat that over and over and over. This is another one that I had to make sure that I wrote on it so I wouldn't throw it away by accident. Next up, we have the finishing pyramids. Now, yes, they're not pyramids, but I really like these ones because sometimes when you have finishing pyramids, they're sharp, they can leave little pinpoint marks in your wood. Depending on how heavy it is, and if it's hardwood or softwood, it can leave bigger marks. So what these are just cutoffs from projects that I was doing where I was cutting 45 and a 45 on my miter saw, and I said, hey, these could be useful. So I take these and I put them underneath whatever project I'm working on when I'm doing finishing. That keeps the project off the surface of the bench. It allows it to dry underneath, and it also distributes the weight of the project. I have made these out of 2x4s. I've made them out of hardwood scraps. And sometimes when I have projects that need a lot of individual finishing on smaller pieces, like a bunk bed, I have to make a lot of these to be able to lift everything off the surface so it can actually dry. Super easy to make. You should do it. Just don't throw them away by accident. All right, the next one is a center marking tool. Now, I've done this many ways using usually math and trying to measure it from one side and then the other side, or put a little mark on it, or do a little fraction calculations to figure out exactly the center. But this is a little jig that you can build yourself that takes all of the math out of it. You can just put it on the board and draw a line down the center. So today we're gonna make one of these jigs too. You can buy these pre-made, or you can just make your own with a board and 2 dowels. Now first up, we're gonna get a board and cut it to a length that will allow you to have the widest board that you wanna measure. Once you have the piece you wanna use, then you measure and make sure all 3 holes are equidistant apart. Make sure you know what size pencil you wanna put in this to mark it. For me, I like to use these mechanical pencils, and so I size the hole to fit just this size. That is your center hole. Then on the sides, you drill the hole that fits the dowel you're gonna use. Once you drill all those holes, then you glue in or press in your dowels on either end and put your pencil in the middle. You have a nice little marking jig to mark the center of a board. It's really handy, and again, you don't have to do any math. You can just put it up there and mark the middle. The next one is a bit more complex, but it still only has 4 boards. This is a jig that will help you cut mortises or anything that's vertical on your table saw. So for this, all you do is put a board that's vertical like this. You put another one on the other side of your fence, and then you put one across the top. And what that does is it sandwiches and holds onto your fence exactly. And then you can slide it evenly back and forth along the fence. This is gonna be custom to whatever fence you have on your table saw. So for mine, I cut out the boards I was gonna use, and then I used my square to make sure this thing was sitting perfectly vertical. I wanted it 90 degrees exactly with the surface of the table saw. With that in place and the other boards cut to size, then I could install the screws to hold the whole thing together. Make sure these are countersunk so that you don't have any heads protruding. I have another jig that's much more complex that I've used for cutting mortises, but this one keeps it simple. You really don't need to buy the fancy ones. They all do the same thing. They hold a board vertical while you're cutting it on the table saw and keep it secure. The way mine works is I install a strip of wood along the back edge that holds the board vertical. Then when you're ready to cut your tenon, you clamp the board to that jig, measure the distance of exactly where you want to cut the tenon, and then slide the jig over the table saw. Turn it around, make another cut, going the other way. You can even do them on the edge so that you get even cuts all the way around and you have a nice even tenon. This is the hard part of doing tenons. Once you have these cut, then you just trim off the edges. Next up is the V block. This is a V block. There's a little V in the top that makes it so that you can hold things in there while you're drilling them or while you're working on them. It's designed to hold something round in here. So you can put a dowel in there, you can hold the top down, and then you have 3 points of contact for that dowel, so you know it's not going anywhere. For me, I use it primarily on the drill press because then I can drill holes into dowels nice and evenly. And I've used that when I make all of my shop drawers and shop equipment because I like the big dowel handles on it. This one is made by just turning your table saw to a 45-degree angle and running this over it one way and then turning it around and running it over the other way. And again, mark it so you don't throw it away. This next one is applicable depending on what kind of clamps you use. These are clamp pads. And I call it that, but it's really just a block of scrap wood. If I'm using a clamp that has metal jaws on it, like my bar clamps, those ones hold a lot of force on them, but they're metal jaws and it's really easy to crush into the wood. So if you're trying to clamp up a tabletop or something, you don't want a big dent on either end of the wood. What that does is distributes the clamping force wider so you have less of an impact on the board. And when I use these, I can come out of here usually without any damage on the edges of my boards. If you're clamping up cutting boards or tabletops or anything like that where you need to use that finished edge, these are great. And I just tape them onto the clamp so they don't fall off. I used to just set them in there, but then they'd roll off. But an extra little tip on this is if you use softwood clamps when you're clamping hardwood, the softwood's gonna dent before the hardwood will. Another great jig that I use is my Dovetail clamp board. And this is literally just a board that is 3 feet long and 10 inches wide. I made this by routing in dovetail shaped slots in multiple directions along here. And then you use micro jig dovetail clamps, which just slide right in here. If you have a board you need to joint the edge of, or if you have something where you're trying to cut a taper on it, whatever you need to do, you set your table saw width to 10 inches. You put your board in there and then you clamp however you want to do it, and you can get whatever taper you want. You can get a nice clean edge on a rough sawn board. This is the simple version of it. If you want to be real fancy, you can put on the back a runner that will fit into your miter slot on your table saw, and then you wouldn't need the fence. But for mine, I kept it simple. I set the table saw fence to 10 inches and then I just run it through. Now, if there's a jig that you use in your shop that's a game changer for your woodworking, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what things you guys use. I know there's a lot of you out there that use simple things to solve complex problems, and they work great. That is a great design solution. And I'd also love to hear if anything in here is new to you or it might change how you do your woodworking. Make sure you subscribe and follow along so you can see the last steps of finishing up the shop here. We're really close. I can see the finish line. We're getting there. Then I'll do a full shop tour explaining all the details of the shop. And I also want to do a time lapse showing the whole thing coming together from just an empty garage to a finished functional workspace. Thank you so much for following along with me on this journey and sticking with me over the last year as we've been building this place up. Now, go build something and we'll see you next time.